All right, I want to talk about burnout. You've probably heard of this before, most people have. I'm going to talk about what it is, what's its definition, who is affected by it, and what can be done about it, and also about the burden that it places on the individual, on an organization, on society. But first of all, I'm going to tell you a story. So this story is about myself when I was a junior doctor a little while ago. And I found myself one day, of all places, on Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. And I'd literally climbed up the first stage of the climb. It was at the end of the day. I had a guide with me. I sat down and I looked at this beautiful scene around me down below. And I looked to myself for a moment and I said, what am I doing here? How did I get here? And then I took in a deep breath and I started to think, what brought me to Tanzania? What brought me to this mountain? And the next thing that I did was I said goodnight to my guide, went to sleep, and the next morning I walked back down the mountain. So I come a pretty long way to have a realization. What was my realization? That I was doing something quite adventurous, apparently fun, and that's the kind of thing that I would normally do. It's very much within my character. It's very much the kind of way I like to be. A bit adventurous, a bit spontaneous. But this time it was different because something in me felt wrong and it felt incongruent. I felt like I was doing something that was not connected to how I was feeling. What I realized at that point was that I was burned out and that what I was doing was actually escaping from feelings, from a situation, and that it was not being done with much awareness when it happened. And it caused me to start to look at what had caused this and to start to address the factors involved, namely the fact that I was working ridiculously long hours, up to 120 hours a week, sometimes not sleeping for at least 24 hours or longer on a single shift. And really, I was starting to notice that I was becoming distant from other colleagues, that I was feeling a little bit resentful to some colleagues, and that my energy was low. And as a result of this, I wasn't really performing my very best at my job. And all of this is basically the definition of burnout. So burnout is not a medical diagnosis. It's not in the, it's not listed as a specified diagnosis, but it is recognized as a condition that occurs in an occupational setting. And that's important. It's not depression. It's not regular stress or anxiety. It's something very, very specific to the work environment and the results of the work environment. So burnout has a few different components to it. Number one is that the person feels a depletion of energy or exhaustion, mental, emotional exhaustion. Another part of it is that this exhaustion also goes with feeling negativism, cynicism, and some kind of self-distancing from a situation at work or from colleagues or from patients. And the third part of it is that there's a result of all of this, which is that one's performance is lower. And that's what defines this whole, let's call it a condition. So what are the different stages of burnout? Well, first thing to say is that there's not some clear-cut menu, even though it would appear that way from this slide. It's not that you have to have every, you don't have to mark every point in every box, and it doesn't have to progress from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, blah, blah, blah. What is important, though, is that there are very clearly identified feelings and thoughts that go along with burnout, and that it is a progressive situation that's going on here. So starting with stage 1, everything seems positive. There's great job satisfaction, a compulsion to prove yourself, free-flowing creativity. It sounds wonderful. The next part, stage 2, stress, the onset of stress. Person starts feeling cardiovascular symptoms, which might mean that they start having their heart race, palpitations, having also difficulty in focusing, irritability, headaches, changes in their appetite, and their productivity starts to be affected. The next stage is a more chronic phase, and the person feels persistently tired, resentful. They might start withdrawing. They might be feeling even a little bit aggressive, a bit of apathy. Their sexual desire may go down. They might notice it themselves at home. Their partner might be complaining, and there may be also a degree of denial of problems, and also starting to use unhealthy coping mechanisms such as alcohol and drug consumption. Next stage is the actual burnout itself, which is an obsession with the problems, having chronic headaches, other physical symptoms, doubting oneself, and isolating oneself more and more. And then the final stage is what's known as habitual burnout, which is that a person is feeling chronically sad, they're feeling fatigued both mentally and physically, and also that they are actually depressed. And when I say depressed, I'm not talking about sadness here. I'm talking about clinical depression, whereby a person is generally unable to enjoy themselves and is feeling very low on a very regular basis. And has poor sleep or sleep disturbances, appetite disturbances, and may even go on to have more serious symptoms of depression. So again, the reason I want to talk about burnout is because it has such a huge price on individuals and on organizations and on countries, on economies. If you look at the statistics in the United States, it's estimated that some 22% of physicians suffer from burnout. In the United Kingdom, it's similar numbers. In Germany also. And this is talking just about doctors, but it also affects nurses, affects teachers. And it's often affecting people who are involved in jobs in which there is an asymmetry between the one person and the next. So it could be a doctor and a patient, it could be a teacher and a student, it could be a lecturer and their students. So there's this inequality between them, and one person is the person who's giving and the other one is the person who's receiving or even taking. The cost of this is that it affects their performance at work, it affects their performance in their personal lives. So the point about mentioning the imbalance is that when there is such an imbalance, there is a lack of feeling of appreciation, which makes the job even more difficult for the person performing it and more tiresome. The other thing to mention is that there's a huge economic burden as a result of this. If I go back to studies even in the last 20 years or so, it was estimated that in a single year, burnout was costing in the European Union some 20 billion euros a year. That's a large amount of money, and I suspect it's probably an underestimate. So what can we do about burnout? Well, there are different approaches that can be taken, different studies that have shown differing results, usually positive results, by the way. Firstly, there is work on the individual, on the person who's suffering the burnout, whether to prevent it or to treat the burnout. The second thing is to work on the actual organization. So very often there are systematic problems within organizations and also systemic problems which result in staff suffering burnout, and it's not necessarily because of the individual's relationship to their own work, but because the system is not designed in the best possible way to enable the person to do their job in a way that doesn't result in burnout. On the side of the studies, it's been shown that interventions on both the personal and the organizational level can have very significant effects on preventing burnout. And also there are interventions in dealing with burnout that can have very positive effects. And these studies have gone on between 6 and 12 months at the very least. And so these are effects that can be sustained for sure. And obviously the economic effects of that are also huge. Now, One of the things that I really like in terms of an intervention for burnout is not one of just trying to change the situation surrounding the person, but of actually trying to build resilience. This is something that I encounter a lot in my own clinical practice as a family doctor, and something that I really feel strongly about because I've seen its value in many respects. And there's a name to this, and it's called ACT therapy. ACT therapy means acceptance and commitment therapy. What is that? It sounds like a bit of jargon. What it basically means is that a person learns to accept the situation for what it is, to see reality as it is and not as we want to see it or not as we think it is, and also to commit to certain behaviors that will actually have a positive value to us in the long term. So in essence, it's a form of resilience training. Now, what's the benefit of this? Well, if you look around you in your own life, if you see what's going on in the world today, especially with social media, so many people are feeling dejected, low, disappointed, thinking that everyone else's life is a bed of roses. If you look at all the photos on Facebook, for example, and other social media, people always seem to be having this wonderful time. And the problem with that is that for many people, without thinking, it's creating an illusion that life is always supposed to mean happiness. And therefore, the moment you don't feel happy, the moment one doesn't feel happy, it's almost like I've failed. It's like I failed in being happy. And the reality is that people are not happy all the time, and neither are we meant to be. There's no appreciation built into our lives if we think that there's only value in being happy the whole time. Happiness is not something to be achieved. It's something that comes as a result of something else. It comes as a result of discipline. It comes as a result of momentary creativity. It comes as a result of moments within relationships that are special. And I would probably be a little bit more modest and aim for two things if possible. One is to aim for sadness rather than depression. And the other thing is to aim to have a kind of contentment on a regular basis rather than aim towards being happy the whole time. And just this very narrative, a change in the narrative, is something that can be hugely powerful and hugely helpful to people. But ACT therapy is really quite a lot of work, and it means learning to accept oneself, to accept a situation, and not to become reactive to the situation. So if I go to my own story from the very beginning of this video, for me, going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro on a whim, having booked a flight 2 weeks before and having made a decision just a few hours before that, is not particularly helpful. What would have been helpful was for me to have sat down and to realize that I was coming up to a holiday and that I was overwhelmed by things at work, that the hours were too long, that I wasn't getting rest, and to actually sit down and experience that feeling, to experience the low, to feel it in my body, to feel where it affects me, to process it and to sit with it and not try to make it go away. Because by trying to make it go away, I'm just avoiding it and I'm escaping it. And what happens then the next time is that the next time I'm confronted with a stressful situation, I react again. I don't actually learn to slow down my thinking, my emotions, to process things, and to actually say, okay, things are not great at the moment, but now I need to sit with this and figure out how to make myself feel okay with not being okay. So in this respect, this is my ideal for what I would love all of you to take away from this video. Of course, there are other forms of therapies, and some of these are psychological. There are also more practical things for most people, such as doing sports, sitting down, doing some kind of mindfulness meditation, listening to music, but staying with yourself in all of these things. What else can help? Well, sleep. It's a basic. We all need it. We shouldn't be denying ourselves sleep, and we should be doing what we can to sleep enough. And for most people, you're looking at least 6.5 to 7 hours a night. Some people would say as much as 8 hours a night, and people obviously vary individually, but this is an important gift to oneself. Another thing that's very important, I've mentioned this in other videos as well, is the importance of social interactions, friendships, and the maintenance of those, which can carry a person through many difficult times in life. So it's an investment that I highly recommend making. One other thing that comes to mind at the moment is also nutrition. So eating well, making sure that you don't eat junk. The more junk that you apply into your gut, the more junk circulates around in your brain. And this is not a good thing. So eat healthily, eat fresh foods as much as possible. Don't eat ultra processed foods. Drink enough water. Avoid certain things. Not overdoing it with alcohol, not getting drunk on a regular basis and using alcohol as a crutch or a medication, not smoking. If you are smoking, find a way to stop. Look for help. It's there. It exists. There's plenty of information and there are plenty of places that offer help. One other thing, find a hobby. It's important for a person's mental balance and for their physical body. It doesn't have to be a very physical activity, but something creative, something using one's hands or using one's minds, writing, pottery, playing basketball. It doesn't matter, but find something that you want to put effort outside of your normal routine life, and that's for you, that's something that you build something into, and something that helps you to add meaning to your own life. Other things that can help may also be that sometimes there are nutritional herbs that can help. One of these being ashwagandha. I'm not prescribing this. I don't need to prescribe it. It's not a prescription medication, and it would be worthwhile you talking with your doctor if this is something you're thinking about doing. But this is a herb which is considered pretty safe, and it does have evidence of good activity in promoting better sleep and better energy levels. The actual name itself it's an Indian word which means ashwagandha means horse smell, because it comes from a herb that smells like horses, and so it was imagined that it improves virility in a person and makes them as strong as a horse. So there's another little tip there. There are also breathing techniques. Breathing techniques include something called box breathing as just one example, but I'm sure you can find plenty of other examples. Box breathing is when a person takes a deep breath in, holds for a period of time, breathes out, and then holds, and then continues that cycle. And one does that usually for about 3 minutes at a time, 3 minutes a day. And what that does is it actually reduces the person becoming more and more stressed as the day goes on. So as if you imagine stress going up like this, it starts to reach a point where it becomes unbearable and starts affecting us. And so if at regular intervals in the day we started to do an exercise like box breathing, instead of the levels of stress going up and up and up, they go up and up and up and then come down, and then up and up and up, and then come down. But they never reach this threshold, which will leave them feeling panicked and overwhelmed. And so this is a very useful exercise that anybody can do in pretty much any situation without it being a big deal. So on a final point, but to sum up a lot of those last things that I was talking about, many of you have probably heard of this term neuroplasticity, which basically means the brain's ability to adapt long-term to changes in the environment, and which is basically initiated by the person themselves. So if I want to start thinking differently about something or start feeling differently about something, I need to practice differently. I need to exercise my brain as though it's a muscle. And by constantly exercising it with a disciplined routine of staying committed to doing something differently, whether it be exercise on a daily basis, whether it be a hobby, whether it be writing, I start to use new connections within my brain, start to cause new connections within my brain. And over a period of time, those connections start sticking and the old connections start becoming weaker. So this is another important aspect of preventing burnout and of actually maintaining a healthy way of life. Thank you very much for watching today. I hope it's been helpful. I'd love to see any of your comments down below, and I'll try to respond to them. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.